Betrayal does not slam a door. It slips a note under it. By the time you pick it up, the lock has already been changed. My name is Amelia Cross. I draw glass and steel into lines that hold their shape when storms decide what they want. People hire me because I make fragile things look invincible. For years I believed I had done the same with my life. I had the firm with my name on the wall, a marriage that looked like a magazine spread, and a best friend who could finish my sentences. Beauty can hide rot for a very long time. The night everything shifted, I was in the model room brushing graphite dust off a white tower that would one day cut a new edge into the skyline. Daniel hovered in the doorway with that look he wears when he is about to disagree quietly. He handed me a printout. A bid submission from a competitor for the Waterfront Civic Center. He tapped the corner where our concept sketch should have glowed like a secret. "It is ours," he said, soft. Down to the glazing pattern. Even the typo in the landscape note. For a second I forgot how to breathe. Our proposal had not left my laptop except in a locked export to the city portal. Only 2 other devices had access. Mine. And the one on my kitchen counter, often borrowed by the man I trusted with everything I owned. I told myself it could be coincidence. I told myself architects borrow the same air and sometimes the same ideas. I told myself what people tell themselves when the floor begins to tilt and they want to keep serving drinks. Then I checked the metadata embedded in the competitor file. It carried the fingerprint of our rendering plugin and the same custom camera profile Daniel coded 2 summers ago. There was no coincidence left to stand on. I drove home with the printout under my coat as if paper could be cold. Nathan was at the stove, turning pasta like a person who reads recipes and believes they will save him. He kissed my cheek and asked about my day. I told him the usual lies couples tell to avoid the larger ones. On the counter sat my laptop. The lid was closed. The timestamp told the truth I did not want to ask for. When he went to open a bottle of wine, I slipped into the study. The access logs sat where I had left them, quiet and precise. There it was. A transfer from my cloud to an encrypted drive labeled with a generic string. The recipient IP matched a law firm Nathan had consulted on a civic procurement case last month. My stomach went tight and hot. I stared at the numbers until they were only shapes. Dinner tasted like nothing. Nathan talked about a judge who loved his arguments and about a client who needed a miracle. He laughed at a story I could not hear. He is a good storyteller. It is part of why juries believe him even when the facts prefer silence. When he reached for my hand, I let him have it because the reflex was older than rage. Later, when he fell asleep, I watched the way his chest rose and fell and wondered how many nights he had breathed like that after walking our life down a hallway I did not know existed. The next morning Lydia arrived with coffee and questions about tile grout for a townhouse renovation we had daydreamed through texts. She has a way of taking up space that feels like friendship. We sat by the window where the city pretends to be kind. I almost told her everything. Instead I asked if she had heard anything about the waterfront bid. She smiled like the word souvenir. "Your sketch was everywhere last night," she said. "People post things even when they know they should not." I asked where she had seen it. She scrolled, frowning. The post had vanished. Her phone reflected my face. I could not read either of us. At the office, Daniel stood over the model as if it were a body. He told me the competitor had lodged an inquiry questioning our capacity to deliver. It was worded in a way that suggested intimate knowledge of our production schedule and staff allocation. Only 4 people had that calendar. 2 were in the room. "Either we have a leak," he said, "or the walls have learned to talk." I called IT to request a forensic sweep. I knew what they would find and I knew what I would pretend to learn. While I waited, I went to the conference room and opened the hard copy archive we keep for clients who believe paper cannot betray you. The waterfront binder was intact, except for one thing. The page with the structural section had a faint impression on it, like someone had pressed a sheet on top and traced. My name sat in the corner of the ghost line. Proof can be delicate when it wants to be. At noon the city emailed to confirm that our proposal had been received and time-stamped. It also noted that a conflict disclosure had been filed by an anonymous party citing a potential relationship between our firm and the reviewing committee. The language was precise and poisonous. I knew exactly who could write like that and enjoy it. I asked Nathan to meet me for coffee near the courthouse. He arrived in a suit that looked like a decision. I set the printout on the table between us. He did not flinch. "This is not what you think," he said. "Good," I said. "Tell me it is better." He talked about helping a colleague understand procurement cycles, about hypotheticals, about academic fairness. He said he had never shared anything that was not already available to anyone willing to click a little harder. He used words like context and mentoring. He never used the word theft. "Did you send our files?" I asked. "I sent public records," he said. "Our camera profile is not a public record," I said. He held my gaze just long enough to make the lie feel expensive. Then he leaned back and reached for my hand the way you tip a waiter to soften the check. I did not let him take it. When I stood, the chair legs made a sound that felt like a small exit. That evening I opened a folder on my desktop I had never named. Inside were copies of things you keep only when you do not want to need them. Emails forwarding drafts to a personal account. Calendar invites opened at impossible hours. A voice memo Nathan left after 2 glasses of something strong telling a colleague that ethics are just the choreography you learn so people will watch the show. I did not know when I had started collecting them. I only knew that I had. At midnight my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the site. Alone. Bring the waterfront binder. If you want to keep what is yours, come now." I stared at the screen until my reflection became an accusation. The site was a fenced rectangle by the river, all rebar and mud and hope. The city would sleep through any conversation there. I put on boots, stuffed the binder in a tote, and drove without thinking about what I would say if someone asked why. The gate was unlocked. Wind moved the plastic sheeting like breath. I stepped onto the gravel and listened. Somewhere a chain clicked against steel. Somewhere water hit rock. A figure stood near the test piles, jacket collar up, face shadowed by the floodlights. "Amelia," he said. "You were not supposed to see any of this yet." My throat went dry. I knew the voice. I knew the way it could make a room lean toward it. "Why are you here?" I asked. He took a step closer and the light caught his face. Nathan looked tired and certain in the way people look when they have already burned the map. "Because I am not the only one taking from you," he said. "And because if you want to win, you need to know whose hands are actually on your work." He lifted a hand, slow, as if calming a skittish animal. "Lydia," he said. "She has been inside your firm for months. And she is not working for you." I did not speak at first. The cold bit through my coat and the binder strap pressed into my palm like a warning. Nathan watched me with the patience of a man who thinks he still has the upper hand. "You're lying," I said finally. "Not tonight," he answered. "Check your access logs again. Every document you touched in the past 6 months has a second trail. Every client call you thought was secure has a twin recording." "From you," I said. He shook his head. "From her. I might be careless with integrity, but she is surgical." I thought of Lydia laughing in my office with her shoes off, talking tile and lighting schemes, asking about elevations like someone who loved learning for the craft of it. I remembered her wandering the layout table, fingers trailing the edge of the waterfront presentation board. Had I handed her everything without seeing the opening she carved? "You expect me to believe you're warning me?" I asked. "Why would you want to help me?" "Because the people using her are not loyal to either of us," he said. "And you are not the target they're aiming for. You're the collateral damage. You always have been." I hated how calm his voice sounded saying that. I hated that part of me believed he could be telling the truth. "Who is she working for?" I asked. He glanced toward the river. "The same development group you've been undercutting in bids for 3 years. They don't want your project. They want your firm frozen out of municipal contracts. And she is their way in." "You paved that way," I said. "I opened a door," he replied. "She built a tunnel." We stood in silence long enough for the river to swallow another gust of wind. I thought about turning and walking away, pretending that this conversation was another manipulation. But something worse than betrayal is the possibility that betrayal has layers you have not even reached. What do you want from me? I asked. To stop pretending you can fix this alone, he said. You think exposing me will restore you. It won't. It will only bury you beside me. If you want to save the firm, you need someone who already knows where the cracks are. Someone who has already fallen through them. You want partnership, I said, disgust rising like heat. I want survival, he said. And so do you. I took a step back. Gravel shifted under my boots. You think I'm going to team up with you after what you did? I think you will do whatever protects what you built, he said. And right now, that means learning the difference between the enemy you know and the one wearing your jacket. The floodlight buzzed overhead. I could hear a sheet of top whipping against scaffolding in the dark. The binder in my hand felt heavier than concrete. Finally, I said the only thing I could. Prove it. Nathan nodded once, as if he had been waiting for that word all along. He reached into his coat slowly and took out a small black flash drive. He placed it on the concrete footing between us like an offering. Files, recordings, timestamps, he said. Everything she passed along before anyone noticed except me. You'll see who she reports to. You'll see whose name is on the contract that will replace yours. And what stops me from turning this over to the city and watching both of you burn? I asked. Look inside before you light the match, he said. I did not pick it up. I did not thank him. I turned and walked to my car without answering. The gate creaked behind me as it closed. At home, I set the flash drive on the kitchen counter next to the lemon bowl. I stared at it for 20 minutes before touching it. I thought of every time Lydia had leaned over my shoulder to offer help. Every casual question about city scheduling protocols. Every time she said she wanted to learn the business side of architecture because she might start her own firm one day. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The first folder bore her name. The second bore mine. And the third held a project file stamped with a company I knew only from rumor. A developer infamous for buying influence and gutting competition with lawsuits that drained you long before a verdict. There was one more folder. It held surveillance photos of my office conference room taken from outside the glass, through the blinds. In one, Daniel and I sat reviewing the waterfront model. In another, Lydia's reflection hovered in the window behind us as if watching her own work unfold. I closed the laptop and pressed both palms to the table. The kitchen felt too quiet. I could almost hear the scaffolding again, the chain against the pile. When my phone buzzed, I flinched. A message from Daniel. We have a problem. Do not talk to anyone until morning. I think Lydia just tried to access the finance server from off-site. I typed one word back, I know. Then I locked the laptop, slipped the flash drive into my coat pocket, and sat in the dark until I could decide what came next. The first list I had made when my trust cracked had 3 lines. Now I knew I needed a 4th. Decide who deserves the ruin. Sleep didn't come. I lay awake listening to the heater click on and off while headlights moved across the ceiling like slow alarms. Every scenario I imagined ended with loss. My firm, my name, my reputation, my people. Somewhere in the noise of thought, one truth settled in. If I moved too slowly, Lydia would. By morning my decision had hardened. I dressed for work as if it were any other day, charcoal suit, hair pinned back, no jewelry but a thin gold band my mother gave me when I opened the firm. I put the flash drive in the inner pocket of my coat and left before sunrise. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew. I went straight to the server room. Daniel was already there, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, his expression somewhere between fury and exhaustion. She's not here yet, he said quietly, pausing his call. I told IT to lock her out of the financial folders but not alert her. She'll know something is off soon. She already does, I said. Nathan gave me something last night. Daniel looked up sharply. You spoke to him. He found me, I said. And he gave me proof. Lydia has been feeding data to Argent West. His eyebrows lifted. Argent West. They've been trying to underbid us for years. She works for them, I said. Or with them. Possibly both. Daniel swore under his breath. We need legal counsel before we confront her. And you need to stay away from Nathan. He'll protect himself first. I know, I said, though I was not yet certain what knowing really meant. We moved to the conference room with the frosted glass walls and the model of the waterfront project still under its acrylic cover. I set my laptop down and slid the flash drive into the port. Daniel sat beside me, tension radiating off him like static. The folders were exactly as I had seen the night before. I opened the one with Lydia's name. Inside were copies of emails between her and a contact listed only as M. Davenport. The footer on several messages traced back to an Argent West development server. She had sent them client forecasts, revised plans, draft budgets. Enough to mimic us and then bury us. Keep going, Daniel said. I opened the second folder. It held internal memos, minutes from board meetings, personal notes that had never left my private system. These were things only someone with my credentials could access. Files I never imagined another person would see, much less deliver to a rival firm. Then I opened the third folder, the one with Argent West's signature. There were contracts drafted in advance, detailing grant transfers and partnership announcements if the waterfront bid collapsed. My name was absent in every version. The firm would remain, but I would not. Daniel leaned back, stunned. This wasn't an exit plan. It was a replacement plan. And we were the blueprint, I said. There was a knock. Tamsin stepped in, clutching her tablet. She's here, she said quietly. Went straight to her desk. She tried to badge into finance. When it bounced, she called someone and left the building. Did she say where? Daniel asked. Tamsin hesitated. She said one word before she hung up. Argent. I closed the laptop. The silence between the three of us held too many answers. We file a claim, Daniel said. Data theft, breach of contract, corporate espionage. And she files one back, I said. She'll accuse us of negligence or complicity. If Argent West uses her testimony, they'll drag this through the courts until our clients scatter. So what do you want to do? He asked. I had spent my career preventing crises. Now I would have to weaponize one. I want her to think she still has time, I said. I want Argent West to think we're unaware. And I want Nathan to believe I'm willing to work with him until I don't need him anymore. Daniel studied me, then nodded slowly. You're planning something. I'm planning an ending, I said. One that doesn't leave us bleeding. By noon, Lydia still hadn't returned. No email, no text, not even a lie to smooth her absence. It was the kind of disappearance that announces something is already in motion. I printed hard copies of the contracts and the emails and sealed them in a flat envelope. I wrote her name on the front and set it on her empty desk where the morning sun could make it look innocuous. Then I called a contact I had in municipal contracting, someone who owed me a favor after I saved their bid from collapsing years ago. I told him only this: if you hear my name connected to a fraud claim in the next 48 hours, call me before you answer. He didn't ask why. He only said, understood. When I hung up, Daniel stood at the office door. You're not going to let the law handle this, are you? I'm not going to wait for permission to protect what's mine, I said. Neither should you. We'll have one chance to hit them, he said. Then we make it count, I answered. At 5, I checked the security feed. Lydia had not come back. But Nathan had sent a single text with no greeting. You have until tomorrow morning before she moves again. I deleted it and turned off the phone. The list in my head returned, each line burned sharp. Stop guessing. Find proof. Decide what kind of woman I am. Decide who deserves the ruin. I found a pen and added a 5th line in clean block letters. Take everything before they do. When I put the pen down, the fear was gone. The city had a way of pretending everything was normal while people quietly burned beneath its lights. I learned to use that pretense like a cloak. By the time the sun rose on the 4th day, our plans were in motion and the office felt like a theater preparing for a scene it had never rehearsed. Daniel came in early with a stack of hard drives and the kind of determined face that used to make me fall in love with his work ethic. Tamsin had cleared calendars and rerouted meeting requests so that no one would accidentally walk into the trap. My municipal contact had agreed to delay the bid adjudication if we provided proof of interference before the committee met. In other words, we had time, but not much. You sure about this? Daniel asked. His voice did not carry scorn. It carried the weight of a man counting the cost. I am sure, I said. We lay everything out at once. No leaks. No second acts. If Argent West tries to sue, the city has already been warned about fraud. If Lydia testifies, we show the emails and the money trail. If Nathan tries to run, someone will have already recorded him promising things he can no longer retract. He nodded and handed me one of the drives. Priya mirrored everything to this. It is clean. It is time-stamped outside the company network. No one can claim we manufactured it. Tamsin pulled up the schedule. At 11:45 Lydia had a meeting scheduled with someone at Argent West in a cafe near the river. Nathan had called Amelia earlier that morning insisting Lydia had been taking calls for work but that everything was being handled according to the book. He had said it with the strained calm of a man who had already decided which lies he would keep. We set the stage. Daniel made sure Lydia's desk was left with the envelope I had placed there, an invitation in broad daylight. Tamsin messaged a mutual vendor to create a diversion at the front desk precisely at 11:40. Priya rerouted internal alerts so IT would appear to be unaware should Lydia try to access anything remotely. I dressed in a coat that made me feel like someone who could hold a room. At 11:55 I walked alone to the cafe. I sat at a table with a view of the entrance and watched the door with the patience of someone who had rehearsed influence-like choreography. Lydia came in, looking as she always did. Hair in an easy topknot, the casual chic of someone who did not believe in showing her battles. She smiled at the host, waved, scanned the room. She sat at a table near a window and placed her phone face down. She did not know I was watching, or she pretended not to know. Either way, she trusted the choreography. Across the room a man arrived in a dark coat and sat with his back to the wall. He was not from Argent West. He was from a rival boutique I had once outbid on a public job. I kept that man in reserve for optics. Lydia's real counterpart arrived 10 minutes later, a woman with a messenger bag and an impatient gait. Lydia leaned in. They spoke quietly. I could not hear words, only the tilt of their heads and the urgency of their hands. At one point Lydia laughed and covered her mouth with the back of her hand. At that laugh my stomach convulsed because it was the sound I had once believed I could trust. I sent a quiet message to Daniel. Now. He acknowledged with one word. On my phone Priya fed a signal to a parked car that looked like a courier van. The van stopped across the street with a deliberate clunk. Its driver was a friend of the municipal contact. He walked into the cafe and ordered a drink directly behind Lydia's table, ostensibly taking a call. Then something I had planned happened. The Argent West woman excused herself to take a call. She left her tablet on the table, face up, unlocked. Temptation is a funny thing. It is always easier to reach for an open door than to break one. Lydia did not hesitate. Her fingers moved over the screen like someone taking a necessary step. She sent a message and opened a file. At that moment Daniel's phone sent a soft ping to Priya. The soft ping triggered a remote capture and Priya started a silent screen recording of the tablet. She also fed the live feedback to my laptop in the conference room. I walked out of the cafe because I had work to do and because I needed to give the scene room to breathe. 10 minutes later I was back in my office and the footage was waiting. On the screen I watched Lydia's fingers pull a folder labeled Waterfront Confidential, and then her thumb tapped share. A menu appeared. She typed an email address. It was an Argent West alias. She hit send. I felt like someone looking through glass at a scene I could not touch. Recording in hand, I left instructions for Daniel. We would not call this evidence yet. We would let them think they had succeeded. The crucial part of our plan required patience. That afternoon Lydia sent an innocuous message to the team about material colors. My response was professional and bored. Nathan, who had been conspicuously absent most of the day, texted me a picture of a judge's portrait, a private joke between lawyers. I ignored it. At 5:30 there was a knock on Lydia's office door. She looked up, startled. Daniel stood there with a folder I had not seen him carry before. He closed the door behind him. For the first 3 minutes the office held its breath. Then they began to talk. Lydia's face flushed. Daniel's expression hardened and then softened in quick succession. After 20 minutes she opened the door and stumbled into the hallway as if she had lost a game she had thought was easy. I followed her to the stairwell because the open corridors were not private. "You betrayed us," I said when she turned. My voice was low but clear. She blinked, then laughed a short, thin laugh. "You think I betrayed you? You are so small." "Tell me what I am missing," I said. She leaned against the concrete and looked at me the way a person looks at an image that requires no interpretation. "You never saw this coming because you always assumed loyalty is currency. It's a commodity, Amelia. You can buy it, sell it, or trade it. I traded mine for a stake. Argent West gave me equity and a promise. They said I would start my own branch under their umbrella. I would have been director of civic projects by next year." "You sold us," I said. "You sold our work." "I sold myself a chance to not end up like you," she said. The words hurt because they were true and because they were said like a sentence practiced before an audience. "You think you are invincible because you designed steel and glass. You are not invincible. You are fragile and beautiful and everyone wants to frame you in a museum." "What did Nathan promise you?" I asked. I needed to know the terms because leverage is always easier to counter when you can see the price. She shrugged. "He promised introductions. He promised he would make the right calls at the right desks. He said he believed in me. He may have even believed it for a minute. People say things when they're trying to be convincing. It is not my fault if he needed to be convincing." "You used my access," I said. "You used my trust." "I used my options," she said. "And when Argent West offered terms, I took them. They are not monsters. They are businesses. They saw an opportunity and they bought it. If you had been more generous, maybe I would not have taken the leap." Anger rolled under my skin. "You could have told me. You would have given me a lecture about betrayal and patience," she said. "You would have reminded me that we rose on other people's backs and that we owed it to a myth. That is why I did not tell you." "You could have come to me," I said. She shook her head, almost pitying me. "You drove the room and never noticed the shadows. That is your flaw and sometimes your strength. I am not you." Her words landed like stones. I had spent years building a life people admired and she had spent years building an escape plan. The question now was whether I would crumble at the sight of being hurt or whether I would use the wound to make a precise incision. I walked back to the conference room and called the municipal contact. "They are compromised," I said. "I have recordings of the transfer to Argent West. I need you to delay everything and convene the committee with councils present. They will need to see the data before any motion is considered." He agreed without hesitation and asked for the files. I sent them a selection, the screen recording of the tablet, the emails, the timestamps. I held back the drive Nathan had given me, the one with the internal memos and the deepest signatures. That would be the final piece and I would place it when the room was full. That night Nathan did not come home. Lydia sent a terse message. "I am sorry. I am not." I deleted it without reading. I sat at my desk with the city files open and felt, for the first time since this began, a quiet resolution. Betrayal had roots and branches. I could prune it selectively, or I could burn the tree down and risk everything around it. The next morning the committee would convene. The evidence would begin to sing. The people who had thought themselves safe would learn how fragile their insulation really was. I did not want vengeance for its own sake. I wanted protection for the people who had built a life under my guidance, and for the integrity of a profession that had become too comfortable with back rooms. I wanted Lydia to know what her choices cost. I wanted Nathan to see that his calculus had left him naked. We had one chance to turn a theft into a reckoning. I intended to make it count. The committee room smelled of paper and nerves. Men and women in suits arranged themselves like jurors despite the absence of a trial. The municipal contact sat to one side with his legal counsel. My files waited in a slim briefcase on the table, the screen recording cued and ready. Daniel stood behind me, quiet, a steady weight. Tamsin and Priya filled the last small seats I had reserved for allies. Outside the glass, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. Inside, everything had already changed. The chair called the meeting to order and I began without prologue. I did not read a prepared statement. I told the story I had lived, the narrative of drafts stolen, of plans copied, of a firm manipulated into a place where loyalty meant silence. I spoke about how people with power rationalize theft as preservation and how that logic erodes the entire profession. When I finished, I clicked play. The screen showed Lydia's fingers opening a tablet and sharing Waterfront Confidential with an Argent West alias. The table watched the movement of her thumb as if it were a pulse. Heads turned. Cell phones lit. The feed recorded the sound of my voice in the office as I had told Daniel what to look for. It recorded the timestamps, the IP, the routes. The municipal council took notes like someone transcribing a verdict in real time. They called Lydia and Argent West in. I had already sent copies of the files to legal counsel who had agreed to represent the city. The mood shifted to procedural seriousness. Questions were asked. People fumbled for justifications. Lydia said she had been tempted, then scared, then convinced it was a temporary arrangement. She tried to place blame on promises and poor mentorship. She apologized in a way that asked for mercy rather than accountability. Then the room asked Nathan hard questions. He had been careful, but not careful enough. Emails surfaced where he had arranged introductions and where he had forwarded internal notes to a private address. He blamed naivety, said he had been trying to help a friend, and then faltered when shown a message he had sent to Lydia asking if she had completed the file transfer. The message read like a man scheduling a favor. He tried to plead ignorance and to frame his actions as small and human. That defense evaporated when I connected his calls to a dinner where a partner from Argent West had been present and where a photo existed of him collecting an award alongside a man who later signed an Argent West check for consulting. The evidence was not vengeful fiction. It was financial gravity. But the meeting was not over. I had one file left that could tilt the room from accusation to truth. It was the drive Nathan had given me, the one I had not yet revealed. I passed it to the municipal council and watched as the attorney scanned the contents. There was an email thread between an Argent West executive and an older woman listed as Amelia Cross. For months I had suspected my mother would play a part. I had hoped she would not, but the world is seldom kind to hope. The attorney asked if Eleanor could be reached. I said yes. A call was placed. Eleanor agreed to come in and to speak with counsel. When she entered the room she looked exactly as she always had, immaculate, controlled, the kind of presence that could convince a room of almost anything. I felt a cold clarity. Whatever came next, I would meet it with eyes open. Eleanor sat with her hands folded and answered questions with the practiced calm of someone who had negotiated dinner seating arrangements and aristocratic grudges her entire adult life. She admitted to meeting an Argent West representative at a charity event. She admitted to receiving briefing materials. She did not use the word collusion. She used the phrase protecting family legacy. When pressed, the veneer cracked. A recorded phone conversation, which I had obtained by tracing a callback number through the drive Nathan gave me, played through the speakers. The conversation was brief but damning. My mother told Nathan to secure the waterfront deal and to rely on connections she cultivated. She spoke pragmatically about resources and influence and the long view. It was not a speech about crime. It was a plan offered with the clinical tenderness of someone who thinks the ends justify the means. Eleanor said she had wanted a future where the name Cross meant stability. She had feared poverty more than she feared moral compromise. She had believed that by arranging certain outcomes she could protect us from the hustles of the world. She had not considered how the shield she built could become a cage. Her hands shook when she said the word protect. The room exhaled collectively. The city council declared an immediate halt to the adjudication of bids and referred the matter to outside prosecutors. The headlines outside were already coalescing into a narrative: favoritism, corporate espionage, a family divided. Afterwards, in the stairwell away from microphones and notes, Lydia found me. Her posture had shifted from defiant to small. She held herself like someone who had learned a hard lesson but not yet how to apologize for it. "You could have been softer," she said, voice like a cracked bell. "I could have been kinder," I answered. "But you chose leverage over loyalty." She looked at me without the edges of performance. I thought I was saving myself. Then save yourself properly, I said. Start by telling the truth about every file you sent. She nodded and left with a list of attorneys to call. Nathan came later. He tried to speak in the hall where cameras could not pick up the exact color of his plea. He said he had believed he was helping. He said he had been naive. He asked if reconciliation was possible. I thought of the dinners, the small kindnesses and the big betrayals. You made a calculation, I said. You chose to trade our trust for influence. That broke us. He swallowed and said, I wanted to protect you from being pushed out. You could have told me, I said. We would have faced the choice together. He lowered his head. I know. I did not reach for his hand. There was a public reckoning and a quieter one. The firm reorganized, and an interim board was installed. Marcus was brought back for questioning and removed. Clients required assurances. Some left. Some stayed. Daniel stayed. He had been steady through every turn and he had never once asked me to be less myself. When the dust settled into a thin layer, he and I worked through a list of immediate changes. Transparent procurement, third-party oversight, mandatory ethics training, and external audits. We rewrote the governance charter so that power would no longer be concentrated in a single signature block. The legal process moved slowly and it moved thoroughly. Argent West's executives shouted their denials and then quietly redirected inquiries when depositions started. Lydia cooperated and received a plea agreement that included community service and mandated professional remediation. Nathan left the practice and took a position with a small non-profit under supervision. Eleanor retreated into a period of solitude and counseling. She issued a public statement about misguided actions born from fear. The family fractured in ways that hurt, and in ways that relieved. I did not celebrate a fall. I simply reclaimed a life. I reopened the studio door and walked into an office that needed mending and stewardship. We built new walls and new processes. We hired people who balanced skill with integrity. I sat at the drafting table and for the first time in months drew lines that did not require camouflage. On a quiet afternoon months later, Daniel brought coffee and slid into the chair across from me. He watched the city scaffolding with a look that had been softened by time. You okay? He asked. I am, I said. Different, but okay. He nodded. We're going to be all right. We will be, I said. As long as we remember why we do this. Not for power, but for the places people live in and for the people who live in them. He reached across the table and took my hand. It was not a promise. It was a partnership. The work ahead was not small. Rebuilding trust takes longer than reconstructing a facade. It requires daily acts of courage and tiny, consistent truths. There were clients to win back and policies to write, and sometimes a memory would emerge like a shadow at noon to remind me that people can choose pragmatism over principle. But I had learned something essential in the months that had burned and then cooled. Power without accountability dissolves into theft. Loyalty unchecked becomes servitude. The better life I would build would have both transparency and mercy in its blueprint. I walked back to my drafting table and pulled out fresh paper. The city outside gleamed like possibility. My hands moved the pencil as if drawing a new contract with the world. This time I would sign the work with my whole name.